All right. Welcome back to I'll Read It Eventually. Today I'm going to be talking about this excellent little book, The Moon is Down by John Steinbeck. Steinbeck is probably much more famous for books like The Grapes of Wrath, East of Eden, and what's that other one? Two guys. One of them's named Lenny. It's going to be in the description below for sure. Why am I not able to remember that right now? It doesn't matter. We're just going to move on. So he's more famous for those books, although apparently not famous enough for me to remember the name. But this is one of his, it's technically a novella. It's actually only 115 pages. So it's not a novel per se. I'm not sure when a book shades from novella into novel. Um, that'd be an interesting thing to look up. But regardless, this is one of his shorter works. Again, it's called The Moon is Down. Moon is Down. And it is a novel about World War II. The title, The Moon is Down, is a reference, I looked this up, is a reference to Macbeth. In Macbeth, Banquo, who is sort of the moral foil to Macbeth, Banquo, right before Duncan, the King of Scotland, is assassinated by Macbeth, Banquo asks his son Fleance, "What's the night like?" And his son responds by saying, "The moon is down," right? And then talks about the darkness. And the idea essentially is that this title evokes a lack of hope, a sense of impending evil, something bad is about to happen. And that is very apt. I didn't know that until after I finished reading it, but having read it, that makes a ton of sense. I'm gonna like write that on the inside cover so that if I read it again, I'll remember when I get to it. But anyway, the book is set in France in probably in 1942. It doesn't because it's only 115 pages. It leaves things out. It skips past a lot of stuff, um, and so it doesn't tell you when it's set. You kind of have to intuit that. If you know when it was first published, it's probably set when it's first published, which was 1942. And so it's set in France. Well, no, I suppose it's probably set in 1940 because that's the fall of France. Yeah, so it's probably set in 1940, um, right as the country falls to the Germans. And although it was almost certainly meant to be about the Germans, um, the book never actually comes right out and says that. It doesn't call them Germans. The back cover here, that material will call them the Nazis or the Germans, but the book doesn't actually call them that, so far as I can remember. Um, they're just the soldiers, the enemy. Um, and so there is this sense that this book could take place almost anywhere, which I think is part of the point. Steinbeck, I think, wanted Americans to be thinking, hey, this could happen here. This story could happen in America. Um, and he wanted any other allied nation or person interested in freedom who was reading it to realize, hey, this could be about me or where I live. But there are some elements which make it pretty clear it's supposed to be occupied France, right after the fall of France to the Nazis in 1940. And the town's never named. It's never even really placed on a map, although there are some references that make it seem pretty clear that it's supposed to be a small town on the English Channel. But again, never comes right out and says that. There are some implied in things, but it never comes right out and says that. Um, and although there is a coherent story going on, it's not it's not a narrative which just goes linearly from one moment to the next. It's essentially a series of vignettes or scenes that are all connected by, first of all, theme, second of all, characters, but they kind of work on their own. You could almost read one of them as a short story. Um, they are referencing each other, they're referencing the outcomes from previous scenes, but it's not one story with a through line. For instance, there's a point late in the book where some of the people have decided, they're going to resist the Germans, and so they started meeting, and they're helping these two young guys get out of town because their brother committed some sort of crime. I don't remember what, but they're helping their brothers get out of town, and they come to this young woman's house, and they're on their way there, and the scene is set in her house. And so she's there and she's talking to a maid from another person's household. That lady leaves, and the young woman's there waiting for the arrival of these other people. And there's a knock on the door, and she thinks, "Oh, it's going to be these guys." She opens the door. Well, it's a German officer who appears throughout the book, and the German officer is lonely and psychologically not dealing well with being hated by the French. He thought they were going to love them. He thought they were just going to throw flowers in front of them and be super happy to be occupied by the Germans and have order and all of this stuff. And they hate the Germans, and it's very clear. And so he's not dealing well with that. He's lonely. He's homesick, and he's also looking for female company. And the scene ends where she sort of sends him away. She's like, "Go away," but he comes back to the door, and the scene essentially ends with her standing there. She flips off the lights in her kitchen, but then as she's flipping off the lights, Steinbeck says that she notes that there's a pair of scissors on the table. And so you could take from that she's gonna knife him, or that she's thinking, you know what, he's probably going to try and do something really sketchy. Maybe I'll beat him to the punch and, you know, take myself out. Or maybe it's not really relevant. And then only later in the book do you hear, almost as a throwaway line in one of the later scenes, "Oh, yeah, she stabbed that guy to death and ran off into the hills," right? But it's not crucial to the rest of the story for you to know how that scene comes out. It builds thematically if you know that, but like you could read the rest of the book and not know how that ended because she's not a principal character. And so that's what I mean. There's a series of vignettes which are thematically connected. There are a couple characters who are there basically the whole time. There's the mayor of the town, Orden. There's the doctor, who's sort of like the unofficial vice mayor, Dr. Winter, and then the German colonel, whose name is Colonel Lancer. And those three are in almost every scene. Um, but the other people, there's sort of a rotating cast of characters who sort of flow in and out and add things and are recurring. But there's not, I wouldn't even really say there's a main character in the book. Um, it's a group of people who are sort of coming onto the stage and then coming off, coming onto the stage and coming off in various groupings. Um, Really effective. It's weird because when you talk about writing stories, when you think about it, it's like, oh, yeah, you're going to have a character, you're going to follow that character. This is not that, but it works really well. You're never confused, partly because, again, it's super thin. It's only 115 pages. Um, so, I liked a lot of things about this book. I think this book probably 4 out of 5, 4.5 out of 5. It's really good. But the intent of the book is to display things like the psychological consequences of occupation. So you've got numerous German soldiers who are struggling with the fact that the French hate them. They were led to believe by their officers before they invaded France, yeah, the French are going to love you. You're going to have a French girlfriend and be drinking champagne and, stepping over, bouquets of flowers because everybody's just going to be so happy to see you and it's going to be great. There's a guy at the beginning of the book who's talking about like settling down in France when the war's over. He's like, yeah, I'll just buy a farm and I'll live here and it'll be great because they'll already know me because I'll have been here for a couple of years. I'll be like their neighbor. And then you start to get the view of some of the Frenchmen, and they're like, "Yeah, this is terrible." One of the early scenes in the book, there's a Frenchman who is being ordered around by a German officer, and he's just like, "You can't tell me what to do. I'm a free man, right? Like I live in a democracy. You can't tell me what to do." And he's thinking that and saying that in the context of living in occupied France. The Germans have just come into town and killed all of the French soldiers. But he's still saying to himself and to them, "I'm a free man. You can't tell me what to do." Um, And so there's like a, brick wall that he runs into. And the Germans run into this brick wall of, oh, yeah, they actually hate us. They don't want to talk to us. They don't want to look us in the eye. They might be trying to, spit in our food or poison our food, that kind of thing. Um, and so things get very psychologically dark pretty quickly. There's also a lot about sort of the moral lapses that happen in war. There's, again, very early in the book, a guy who kind of just snaps and kills a German soldier with a pickaxe, which, whoa. But he kills a German soldier, and they're questioning him before they, put him to death. And they're like, hey, buddy, like, do you think that was wrong? And he's like, I don't know. I mean, I'm French. Well, he doesn't say he's French, but that's effectively saying like I live here and he's from somewhere else and he took over my land. So like I don't know. Probably I'd do it again. Um, and there, one of the German soldiers, Colonel Lancer, who again, if there's a main character, he's certainly one of them, I guess. But at one point, and this is wild considering what happens later in World War II, but he says at one point when he's thinking forward at the beginning of the book, he's thinking forward to what is inevitably going to happen in this occupation. He knows, because he fought in the First World War, he knows a lot of the French are not going to be happy to be occupied, and they're going to resist, and they're going to work slowly in the coal mines and all this stuff. And he knows that. And he says at one point, very early in the book, you know, I'm just a soldier following orders. And it's crazy that in 1942, before most people are aware of the full extent of the Holocaust, Steinbeck is already using that language to describe the Germans. And obviously, it's not in context of the Holocaust, but that was like floating around in the culture at that time enough that Steinbeck was like, "Oh yeah, this is what they would say. This is what they're saying right now. Is we're just following orders. We shot that Frenchman who was defending his land. Well, we were just following orders. That's just what we had to do. That's protocol. And yeah, it's interesting that was a common enough idea that even before the Holocaust was well known, even among some Germans, um, that is sort of the rationale. We're just following orders, guys. We're just following orders. Um, so really, really good emphasis on some of that stuff. Lots of moral gray areas, and there's like, we might have to murder this guy, and how do we feel about that? Well, that's war. Um, and then moral lapses. Am I a good person or not? If I have to kill these people, does that make me good or bad? There's a collaborator who shows up throughout the book, and he kind of thinks he's doing. He actually tries to justify himself at one point for working alongside the Germans, and so yeah, just very interesting sort of moral questions. Um, there's a lot of exhaustion in this book. There's several German soldiers who go insane. Their reference is just like, oh yeah, they went stir crazy and they had to be evacuated, or um, Frenchmen, they start to starve them at one point in the book because they aren't working fast enough to get coal out of the coal mines. And so there's descriptions of these Frenchmen who are, laborers and miners, and they're like, yeah, kind of on my last legs here, got nothing to eat. And they're sneaking food around. And yeah, and it's winter most of the time. Most of the book is in winter. And so it's really just cold and dreary and dull. And Steinbeck does a really great job of creating an atmosphere with just a couple references to lighting or time of day or time of the year, um, but really sparingly. Because again, this book is only 115 pages long. He doesn't have space to be like, all right, well, I'm going to give you 2 or 3 pages about this. If you've read like East of Eden, Steinbeck spends like a whole chapter in East of Eden just describing the valley where most of the book is going to take place. Just land. There's no people. He's not talking about the people. He's just like, yeah, it looks like this, and the water does this, and there were Indians here at this time, and then buffalo, and blah 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 blah. Here, he's got like 2 lines where he can be like, yeah, so let me tell you about the winter, and then he's got to move on because he's got 12 to 15 characters that he has to talk about and run through a story and characterize in ways that actually matter. And yeah, so yeah, he does a lot with atmosphere. I don't know how he manages to do it. I mean, there's a reason why he is pretty standardly agreed to be one of the best writers in English, certainly in the last 100 years. But yeah, I mean, like he's good because this is not one of his more well-known works, I don't think, and it's still excellent. So yeah, I mean, I've read East of Eden, and it's awesome. It's really really good. But like this book is, yeah, this book is smaller, and so I wouldn't say is as good because there's just not as much material by which to judge. But if you were to take 115 pages of East of Eden and compare it to this, same level, I would say, or nearly. It's really really good. Um, One of the points of the book is just that at a certain point you're going to push people into a corner. The Germans, the whole book are like, well, if we kill a couple people, then they'll get in line, right? We'll get this guy who attacked these people with a pickaxe, and he killed that German officer. We'll shoot him, and then everybody else will get in line. And there's one point where somebody's kind of like trying to work the logic out. They're like, okay, yeah, we'll kill that guy, and then somebody's like, what if we kill that guy and they like don't stop? And they're like, whoa, we'll arrest the next guy. We'll shoot him, and they're like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, sure. What if we kill that guy and then they don't stop? And they work it out, two or three people down the line, and they're like, well, we'll just kill them all. I mean, I don't know. They're just gonna get in line. They will have to understand order, okay? And there is a slow process of realization, which again, the primary German officer, the commander, Lancer, he says pretty much outright at the beginning, I know that this is going to get really ugly and that they're not just going to fall in line and we're going to have to treat them really badly and they're going to hate us and we're going to kill a lot of them. But we're going to get what we came for, which is coal, primarily. Um, and his other adjutants and his younger officers are having to learn this, and some of them are just like, yeah, it's fine, we just killed him, right, it's fine. And others are psychologically struggling with, again, being hated, with having to put people to death, and they're like, do we really need to shoot that guy? Do we really need to starve these people to death? um, yeah, it's interesting. And there are a number of references to sort of the French being a free people and sort of, making their own decisions and being their own people. And um, contrary to that is sort of the Germans talking about the leader. That's what Hitler is called in his book, is the leader, for the capital L. Um, and the Germans are all about order, and they're like, yeah, everybody falls in line, and we all, we think the same way because it's efficient, and blah 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 blah. And those two things butt heads in this book, and the Germans are unable to see and unable to understand that not everyone in the book thinks their worldview is just inevitable, and not everybody thinks that their victory is inevitable. Because again, this is written, it's set in 1940, 1941, when the Germans are like, you know, ascendant in Europe. I mean, they conquer all of Europe basically by 1940, 1941, certainly all of Europe. Um, And in 1941-42, they're invading Russia, and the Russians are on their heels. And this book is published in 1942. So the Axis is like ascendant, like they're winning hands down in 1942. Stalingrad hasn't happened. Operation Barbarossa is still generally judged to be a success at that stage. They're like advancing on Moscow. Britain is this island besieged. The German U-boats are sinking everything in the Atlantic. The Japanese are advancing across the Pacific. I mean, it's a scary time to not live in an Axis power. Well, it's a scary time to live in an Axis power unless you're, actually part of the Axis, in which case, feels great. But it's a scary time to live in a democracy. And one of the things I saw somebody say about this book, it's propaganda that works, because it essentially says, you know what, this is pretty dark and dim, and yeah, they're starving people and executing people, and we're running away from our homes and sailing across the English Channel in order to be free, in order to live. But eventually, going to back people into a corner, and they're going to fight back with anything they have, right? Pickaxe. Eventually, the townspeople use radios to get the British to drop them dynamite so that they can start blowing things up. And yeah, the that thing I mentioned where they're like, oh, well, we'll just kill the people who resist, and then they'll stop resisting. They start to try that throughout the book, and the Frenchmen, every time there's an execution, the Frenchmen are not put off by death. They're just sort of willing to accept it. They're like, yep, well, I did kill that guy, like I did put a pickaxe in that guy, or I did blow that thing up with dynamite, or I did sabotage that, truck or whatever. So yeah, I guess you're gonna have to kill me. But the Germans are hoping that it's gonna have this massive psychological effect where they're like, oh, man, I'm gonna die. Whatever shall I do? This is the end. And the French are just sort of like, yeah, c'est la vie, whatever, it's fine. Um, and more people take from that it's like, oh, well, that's not that big of a deal. I'm going to resist the Germans, right? I'm going to go plant a stick of dynamite. I'm going to go get a pickaxe. I'm going to contact the British. I'm going to flee to the English, across the English Channel. So, um, yeah, it's interesting. The book ends, and I'm not going to spoil it, but it ends on some ambiguity because it's unclear. There are a number of people. It's unclear if they live or die. There's some strong implications, but it's unclear who lives and who dies. Um, it's unclear how things actually end because, again, this book is published in 1942. It's probably meant to be portraying 1941. Um, and the Axis is winning, right? So John Steinbeck is writing this about World War II. He's trying to talk about victory at a time when the Allies are losing. And crucially, he doesn't know how World War II ends. So, like, that's hard for us to imagine today, but, like, imagine not knowing who's going to win World War II. He doesn't when he writes this book. And so, there's a mass amount of ambiguity, but there's a lot of, like, big pointer fingers, saying, hey, look over there, think about that, think about the implications of that. Not everybody gets their just desserts, right? Because you don't know who lives and who dies. There are a number of people where you're like, oh yeah, that person probably deserves to live, or that person probably deserves to die, and you just don't know. The book ends mid conversation, essentially. Yeah, there is, and I'll mention this because it's not going to spoil anything, but I thought it was really interesting. So there's a dialogue, a Platonic dialogue, where Socrates has been sentenced to death by the city of Athens because he's corrupting the youth with all of his questions and he's questioning the gods and all this stuff. And near the end of that dialogue, Socrates is about to die. And one of the last things he says is to one of his friends whose name is Crito. And he says, Crito, I owe a rooster to Asclepius. Will you remember to pay my debt? And one of the characters in this book is quoting from that Platonic dialogue. And he says that line to one of his friends, and his friend says, yep, I'll remember to pay that debt. And the book basically ends on that note. And it's really, it doesn't make a lot of sense if you don't understand what that dialogue is about and who Asclepius is. So, this is one of those big pointer fingers that you kind of have to be familiar with the classical world to understand. Asclepius is sort of a god of healing and health. And when you sacrificed a rooster to the god of healing and health, it was essentially meant to be understood in terms of rebirth or renewal because you'd sacrifice a rooster, right? And typically that kind of sacrifice would take place at night. But then you'd wake up in the morning and stereotypically be awakened by the call of a rooster. And so it's a reference essentially to, hey, there's some hope for rebirth here. There's some hope for renewal. Life will go on. There's also a sense in which, if you read the dialogue where Plato or where Socrates dies, he indicates to a degree that, like, it's okay for me to die because I'm going to, the perfect world of forms, which is where he wants to be, because it's a world of pure mind. Anyway, essentially, death isn't the end, right? Or like death is the worst thing they can do to me, and that's not actually that bad. And that's kind of what Socrates is saying. Is yeah, they're gonna kill me. I mean, I've drank hemlock, but like that's it. They can't do anything else. Um, I still win because my ideas are still out there, right? And that's how this book ends, is with one of these characters saying, yeah, probably gonna go die, but my ideas are still out there. And his friend is saying, hey, I'm going to pay the debt, right? I'm going to make sure that your ideas are still out there. Um, so really excellent book. Hmm. It's really beautiful prose. It's so well written. Steinbeck, gosh, I don't even know how to describe it. I mean, you just need to read some Steinbeck. Maybe you should read The Moon is Down. It's just he has such a command of the English language, and it's just a delight to read. Um, yeah, just beautiful to read. He does a really good job with characterization. Um, Not every important character is even on all 115 pages, and yet so many of them you get a really good sense of who they are. There are a number of German officers, and they're all introduced in like 3 pages, and so it can get a little confusing who's who. Um, some of them start to die, so it gets easier to remember who's who. But um, that would really that's the only group that I would say there's a criticism of like, yeah, I couldn't keep them straight. Is just there's too many Germans, and they're all just yeah, he's a German. You just have to remember the names in order to keep them straight. But a lot of the French are really well characterized, really well drawn out, even though there's almost no space given to doing that. Steinbeck's just that good in doing that in such a short space. It's highly readable. Like I said, his prose really good. Just washes right over you. I mean, it is not hard to get into what he's saying. He's not hard to follow. He's not overly verbose. He uses a lot of words when he wants to, but he's not. It's not like a thicket of words. You're not cutting through there with a machete. Um, it's just sort of a delightful walk through a field, and it's just sort of sights and sounds and smells just all wafting past you. So it's really, really great. Highly readable, very interesting. Does draw you on. You're like, oh, what's gonna happen to these people? What's happening next? And for many people, this would be the primary selling point. It's short, 115 pages. So, um, yeah, I recommend it. I read it in this really. It looks really old. I don't know exactly how old it is. Um, there's a page that tells. Yeah, so this is from the 1960s, 1966. It's a Bantam Pathfinder edition. It's in pretty rough shape. I actually had to repair it here, um, which is something I'll probably talk about in another video, is repairing books. But it's great. Um, I can't recommend this enough as an easy read, as a fun read. Um, it's a book anybody could read and be interested in because it's so short that I mean, I read it in 2 days, and that was barely committing any time to it. I think I sat down and read for 40 minutes and I was halfway through it. So, um, you too can read a John Steinbeck novel in a day if you want, um, or 2 days. So, The Moon is Down. And honestly, I would just give a blanket recommendation for all Steinbeck, but obviously, The Moon is Down is the one I just read. So, once again, The Moon is Down by John Steinbeck. Really good. 4 out of 5 stars, maybe 4.5 out of 5. Honestly, I wish it were a little longer because it was good. So go read it or something else. That's what I'm going to go do.